Welcome to the Women's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Women's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? The road to wealth is come up with a website and poof, you're a billionaire. My guest is an attorney, and we're going to talk about the very first step in creating a website. And I would like to welcome Rose Auslander. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. What is the first thing one does when they're thinking up a domain name? Well, wait a minute. Let's start with what exactly is a domain name?
The domain name is the letters that you type in to get to somebody's website.
All right.
You have to have a name, and then you have to have a top-level domain that's then attached to that name, like .com, etc.
What is the first step somebody does to create a domain name?
Well, sometimes somebody already has a business.
All right.
And sometimes they already have a name that identifies their business or identifies their product, and sometimes it's a famous name. And in that case, it's very easy to come up with your domain name, because what you're going to want to do, if possible, is use that famous name that you already have and add the top-level domain next to it, such as, for instance, Coke.com or what have you. The only difficulty you can run into is if someone else has already snuck in there and appropriated that particular domain name, and then that's a problem you'll deal with. On the other hand, if you don't have a pre-existing business, the first thing you're going to have to do is come up with a name.
Okay. What do you do? Do you want something that's easy to remember? Do you want something catchy?
You definitely want something that's catchy or easy to remember, because it's not like bricks and mortar, where in real estate it's location, location, location. You find a great location for your store or your restaurant, and then you build some wonderful, facade that people will look at and find very attractive and want to come in. On the web, the only thing you have that's your location and that's your attractive facade is your domain name.
I've got this name, barrieswitzen.com. What do I do next?
Well, if you did want to use your own name, yeah, I mean, you would certainly want to check it out on the web, partly because if anyone else was using it, that might be somewhat upsetting to you. But also partly to see, if it's available to register. And then you could certainly go to one of the domain name registrars and go ahead and reserve it. On the other hand, if that's all you did, you could find yourself potentially in trouble down the road, because it's possible that somebody else somewhere might have been doing something like the services that you were offering or the goods that you were selling under a name that was identical or very similar. They may have been doing it for a long time. They may have had rights that they've built up, and you could get your business rolling, you could invest your money, you could have your investors, people could be starting to know this business by this name, and so forth, and then you get this letter from a law firm.
Nice.
Nice threatening letter saying that if you don't cease and desist from your use of this name, you're going to be very unhappy. And that's what you don't want to have happen.
So what do you do?
So first of all, aside from picking the name, which we really need to talk about later, assuming that you have picked one that you just feel like you have to have.
Right.
Then you do what we call clearance. You
What exactly is clearance?
You look to see if it's available. You look to see who out there in the United States, or if you're going to be doing business worldwide in the world, is using this name already or has registered this name already and has rights to it.
Okay, well, let's start with first things. You register it on the internet, or you look on the internet to see if the name is there.
It's often easier to register it in some way on the internet because there are so many options that you can have.
All right. What kind of options?
Well, there are different top-level domains that you can use, or you can use a plural of it, or you can do an I hyphen and then the name, or you can do an E hyphen in the name, or you can do the name net dot whatever. So there are a lot of ways you can kind of fudge and get some sort of domain. But if you're having to work that hard to get a domain name, that's not a good sign.
All right.
Because if there's already someone out there with using something very much like your domain name, it's very possible that they have this kind of prior existence, prior business, prior goodwill, prior right, that they can turn around and send you one of those letters that you don't want to get.
You found this fabulous name.
Right.
What's the next step?
Once you have this fabulous name, and again, we're going to need to talk about what a fabulous name really is, because sometimes people think they have a fabulous name and they really have this awful name. So anyway, but you
Okay.
have a fabulous name. And the next thing that you have to do is clear it. And what that involves, it's not enough to just go register it with the registrars that register domain names.
Okay.
What you have to do is do just a complete search, at least a complete search in the U.S. if you're doing business here. And unfortunately, there's no one list of every mark in the United States that you can just search. What you need to do is go to a searching firm of some kind. And what they can do for you is they can look at every application and registration on the register that's kept by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. They can look through all the state registrations. They can look through telephone books and other things to find what we call common law uses, which is to say people who are just doing business under that name. And they also will look for other domain names on the web.
Okay, so they do that throughout the United States.
Yes.
All right. Would they do it globally too?
You can also, if you're going to be selling your goods to people in other countries or offering services that people in other countries are going to be taking advantage of, yes, then you probably should, in that case, get some kind of worldwide search, and those certainly can be done. And in some sense, it's almost more important in other countries to clear and then register your trademark, because there are many countries where you get no rights at all through using your mark, and you only get rights through registering it. At least here in the United States, even if you, for whatever reason, don't register your domain name as a trademark, you still would get certain rights through using it on your site to identify your goods or your services.
So in other words, if I come up with a name, I have to trademark it in other countries? And do I have to trademark it in each individual country, or just is there a universe in the European economy, let's say, or the Asian market that says, okay, you're registering it here and it includes all these countries?
Right. Well, again, just to clarify, if you're only selling goods in the United States or only offering your services really in the United States, then you don't need to go that extra step and expense of all this international. However, assuming that you are going to sell internationally, there are some shortcuts. There's something called a CTM.
What does that stand for?
It's a community trademark, and
Oh,
that's
okay.
for the European community. And there is something called the Madrid Protocol, which is an easy way also to register in a somewhat larger area. But bottom line, it is time-consuming and it is expensive. It may affect a company's decision on just how internationally they want to offer their
Wow.
goods and services.
Okay, can I do a quick search of my name? Is that possible?
In the United States, the Patent and Trademark Office has very kindly put up a website at US, as in Sam, PTO.gov.
Okay.
And you can go on to that website, you can click trademarks, and they have something called their TESS, T-E-S-S, searching. And you can search basically your exact trademark and see very quickly if someone has your exact trademark. It's a little more difficult to search for something else. It's a good first step, and it's free.
Oh, that's a nice word.
It's a nice word. But again, keeping in mind that eventually it's not enough, because it won't turn up all these companies across the country who have rights through using their names but have never registered them. And it won't turn up what's on the domain, on the web and other domain names, and it's very hard in that method to find other marks that might be similar but are spelled somewhat differently, or might be similar because they're similar in meaning, even if they're not exactly the same word, and so forth. Because when you're figuring out if there's going to be confusion through the use of two trademarks, it's not just the exact spelling, it's a similarity in sight, sound, and meaning.
Wow.
All three.
That's quite a lot to consider.
It's a lot to consider. So when you are doing this clearance, it's not, again, what is simple. It's not a simple process. You end up with a search report a few inches thick and all those things to consider.
Okay. After you've done the thorough search and nobody has got your name that you can find, all right, what do you do next?
It's a very, very good idea to go ahead and register your mark in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office at the least, and if you have international considerations, then that would be next. Within the United States,
Yeah.
there is one very nice option that you have, which is that before you even put up your web, your site, once you intend to do so, you can file what's called an intent to use trademark application that then, in some sense, will reserve your rights as of the date that you filed it, assuming that eventually you do put up your website, you do use the name, your registration issues, you would have a presumption of rights throughout the United States as of that filing date, which would be the earliest probably that you might be able to do.
Now, what exactly is the difference between a trademark and a service mark and a copyright?
A trademark is what identifies products. Some
Only products?
Product that you sell.
All right.
A service mark identifies services, like you might get in a restaurant or a retail store. Now, those are quite similar. Other than the fact that one is services, one is products, they're very close. Copyright is different.
All right, what is a copyright?
You can't copyright a name. People often say that, but you cannot, in fact, get a copyright on a name. It's just not enough. A copyright protects a creative work, a poem, a short story, a book, a painting, a film, a TV show, a sculpture. There has to be at least a significant portion of it could even be, you could even maybe get a copyright in some text on a label, but there would have to be enough, not just one name. And what the copyright is protecting is that creative work itself, the expression, not the ideas, but the way those ideas are expressed. And very differently, a trademark protects a commercial reality. It protects the ability of that name to identify you as the source of products on the market or services on the market.
Well, can you use a trademark to encompass a service as well as a product? And do you have to have a product to have a trademark?
You can use the same trademark for either services or products, certainly.
Okay.
But in order to have rights, in order to have some actual real trademark, you have to be doing business. You have to have a business. It has to be, could be a product, it could be a service, it could be products and services, but there has to be real business going on.
Okay.
The trademark doesn't have any existence in and of itself without its connection to that product on the market or that service on the market.
All right, you've done the trademark, you've done the service mark, then what?
In terms of filing an application, again, back to our uspto.gov website.
Right.
Yes, it is possible to do that. You can log on, there is an application, you can follow the guidelines, you can fill it out, and you can send it in. The caveat on that is that there are pitfalls.
Okay.
For instance, the person or entity that you name as the person or entity that intends to use this trademark or service mark really has to be the one that's going to be using it. If not, the whole application is in some sense voided, because whoever is filing it has to have a real intent to use it. So if you file it saying, you know, I, Rose Auslander,
right,
plan to use this service mark, but it turns out that after all, as a commercial reality, it's really my law firm, Carter, Ledyard, and Milburn, that's going to be using that trademark. I'm not going to have a good filing date because I didn't file it correctly.
Ah,
Right.
okay.
So that's certainly one thing that you'd want to be aware of. You want to be, again, in terms of how you describe your product or your services, you want to describe it as, in some sense, as broadly as possible, because if you've left something out, you can't later on add anything. You can only narrow.
Well, that's not fair.
That's back again to the, they want that other fee, et cetera.
Oh, is that what it's all about? Okay, that's the game they're playing.
And no, it's actually, I think, somewhat more than that as well, where at the time of filing, you have to have intended to use certain things, and you can't later on backpedal and say, well, I also intended to use these other things.
Oh, wonderful. Now, some people register more than one domain name.
Certainly.
Okay. Is there an advantage to it or a disadvantage? The disadvantage, I know, is the cost involved.
The cost isn't really that high. It's much more expensive to register a trademark than to register a domain name. And it really is advisable. People think of it as sort of building a wall around their property. It's a keep-out zone. So pirates can't get in as close as they could otherwise. And it's also a strong message to anyone looking around that you take this domain name very seriously. So it is actually quite a good idea to do that.
To file a trademark application.
No, again, that's what we were saying before. You can get onto the web, you can get onto the website, and you can do it yourself. And sometimes that will fly through if you've got a good mark, nobody else has anything similar, what you're doing is straightforward. And certainly, you could save yourself some money. On the other hand, sometimes if you file it, there may be, the trademark examiner may think that there's somebody else whose mark is a little too close for comfort and may hold up your application until you can clear that up. Or they may be very unhappy about the way you've described your product or your services. That might hold it up. There may be other technicalities that might hold it up. And at that point, if you do find that it's all getting a little confusing and over your head, you may want the assistance of a trademark attorney.
Piracy. How do you deal with it?
Well, it's out there. So it's one of those facts of life that anyone in business who's successful is going to have to deal with it. I mean, one way not to have to deal with it is not to be very successful, but I think we mostly don't prefer that route. So I guess in some sense you hope to be successful enough to attract a pirate or two. And if you do, it's back to some of the things we mentioned earlier. First of all, just to be cautious, you want to investigate to make sure that the person you think is a pirate isn't someone who actually has a better right than you do.
Okay.
And that's a step that people are sometimes tempted to skip and can be very sorry and get bitten in the back if they do skip it. So first of all, let's make sure this is in fact a real pirate.
How do you find out, first of all?
You can certainly get an investigator to do some discreet inquiries, as they say, and to find out how long the other entity has been using this particular trademark or service mark and how they've been doing it and so forth, just to find. It also is useful to have that information if you want to then proceed to go after them, that you may have a better idea of the extent of the illegal activities that you're dealing with as well.
A lot to think about.
But it's not enough, of course, to know what they're doing. The next step is, what are you going to do about it?
Okay. What options does one have?
You certainly have options. So I roll up my sleeves. You can send what we in the biz call a cease and desist letter. And that's that letter I was referring to earlier, this lovely letter that hopefully the pirate, in this case, is not too happy to receive, saying, who you are as the prior owner, explaining to them, as if they already don't know, what your rights are. Hopefully you have registered your trademark and perhaps can attach a lovely copy of your certificate of registration to reinforce the words in your letter. And then saying that, it's come to our attention that you seem to be doing this thing, and we demand that you stop doing it. Again, sometimes you want to be a little careful about your wording so that they're not the ones running to court before before you've chosen the court that you might want to sue them in, and so forth. The other thing, too, is that sometimes you may choose not to send a letter like that, because what that can trigger is a bit of a shell game, where the person who's registered as the owner of the domain may just shift it off to someone else, and maybe to someone else, and you may have trouble tracking down the owner of the moment to sue.
Wow.
So sometimes people decide to avoid that risk and to proceed straight away with some kind of a legal action. And in that case, luckily enough, as we sit here today, there are some good legal options. If we had sat here a year ago, I wouldn't have quite such a smile on my face about this.
What's changed?
What's changed is that the Federal Trademark Act has been amended to add an anti-cyber piracy provision. And the ICANN, which is the entity that oversees the registrars that issue domain names and so forth.
And ICANN stands for?
I can't even spit it out for you. I'm
all
very
right.
sorry. You get, after a while, you're so used to all these acronyms that don't even need to know.
Okay.
But what it has is a uniform dispute resolution proceeding. Now, I can give you the full name on that, but we all call it the UDRP.
Okay.
And that's an alternative to having to sue in court. And it's relatively speedy, relatively inexpensive, and the results for trademark owners to date have been quite optimistic and quite good. And what you need to do for that is to assemble certain information that you need on your rights and your mark and what the pirate has been doing, and put them together in a complaint that is substantiated by some evidence of this, and send it into the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO.
WIPO?
WIPO.
That's cute.
And so you have the UDRP filed in WIPO. You can just get these little acronyms rolling. And then the other side, which we are now thinking of as the pirate, but I'm sure doesn't, well, may not think of itself that way, has a chance to put in its own answer to this complaint and explain that its domain name really isn't very similar. That could be a defense. Or that it has a perfectly decent reason for using it, and that there's really no bad faith involved. And then it's up to an arbitrator to decide. And fortunately, they do so relatively quickly, and it's not terribly expensive.
There's that fee again.
There's that fee again. The only aspect of this that is what you might want to consider is that it doesn't actually stop use of your domain name, whatever, by this other party as a trademark. It can succeed in transferring the domain name to you or stopping the use of the domain name, but your pirate could still be out there on the marketplace, perhaps, using your trademark, and this UDRP would not do anything about that. If the use of your trademark on the market is a real concern, then you're going to want to go to court, and then you have the advantage of the anti-cyber piracy, which can deal with the domain name in a similar way as the UDRP could do, but you also have your trademark infringement type action that you could always have brought, which can deal with the underlying use of the trademark.
What if somebody has already got your name and you're talking about .com and they're a .org? What do you do in a case like that?
Well, it depends. I mean, if they are a perfectly legitimate organization that existed before the web and they have rights, then you're probably going to be coexisting with them. It's an interesting thing, because before the web, you might have had an identical trademark owned by two different well-established companies that were in such different areas of business that they would never have run into each other, and you would never have had any confusion. What's happened is that the web has brought everybody much closer, because there isn't much difference between a .com or a .org.
Right.
And therefore, all of a sudden, somebody who's, selling soap suds, it might be right near someone who's creating computer software, and normally they would not have had anything to do with each other. But on the web, they can get quite close. And in that case, people have different, sometimes practical solutions that they do. Sometimes, again, assuming that they figured out that both sides have perfectly legitimate rights and so forth, they might agree to help clarify, mutually clarify any confusion, and they might each put on their website that if you're trying to get the soap flake people, you're going to want to click here.
Oh, interesting. What would you like to leave the audience with?
I think you sat here and you said, oh my God, thinking about this, I'm exhausted. And I think people who just want to put up their little website look at this and think, do I really need to invest this time and money now? This is daunting, this is exhausting, I've got a business to get up and running. And what's so important, what's tremendously important, is to make this investment now. Right now, it's a little preventive medicine. It's going to the doctor for that checkup, rather than waiting until you're terribly ill 5 years down the line, when it could really cost you. The mistake is to wait until you've got the website up. You've invested in the business, the money is rolling in, and all of a sudden...
somebody hits you with a lawsuit.
Exactly.
Wow. Rose, thank you so much. I mean,
Pleasure.
this is so exciting. And I hope you've learned something too. And let me know what your domain name's going to be. I'd like to hear from you. That's really Barrie's Wardrobe, provided by Jerry Richards, 530 7th Avenue, New York City, New York.